very much, dear comrades. It's a big honor to be here. I will make a short introduction about the roots of this conflict and civil war in Ukraine, and later we can have some free discussion to understand what can be decision of this crisis. Maybe many of you know that one of the conflict lines in Ukrainian society was attitude to so-called European integration in Ukraine. We have a very deep split in Ukrainian society. Half of Ukrainian people were willing to go to European integration course and to be part of European Union, and half of people was totally against it. You know that President Yanukovych was supporter of this European integration line, and it was huge governmental propaganda that European Union is paradise on the earth and we should be there. And but half of Ukrainian people was totally against it, and there is many different reasons why they was against it. It's the most simple explanation that they was just pro-Russian, but it's not enough to say something like that, because part of people on the east and the south of the country would say about our common spiritual roots with Russia, our common religion, common history, when other part of people were taking care about their jobs. Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in Europe, but still in the east of the country we are still producing engines for helicopters, space rockets, aircrafts and other high technology stuff. And of course, these goods are not allowed and would never be allowed in European markets, obvious, because they are out of European Union certification. The traditional markets for these goods was Russia and Asia markets. And people were following the results of so-called European integration in such countries like Baltic countries, like Bulgaria, for example. And what was the result of this integration? They are totally losing their industry, they are losing their jobs, they are losing their infrastructure, and half of population just moving to the rich European countries in order to find some low-paying jobs. And of course, Euromaidan movement was a very massive movement because people were really angry about Yanukovych mafia. But at the same time, this movement had very reactionary roots, because generally, people were talking about cult of individual success, that in European Union, whoever is working can be a rich person, that it is good ideas for good possibilities for business, and we will be rich in this free trade zone with European Union. And of course, a lot of people were willing a non-visa regime with European Union in order to get possibility to get some low-paid jobs in European Union. Of course, this movement was very well organized, and Ukrainian oligarchs supported this movement. And when Yanukovych said, okay, I'm giving up, I'm resigning, and they made a political agreement, the next day we had these awful killings on Maidan, where more than 70 people died on the shooting. And now there is a lot of questions. Who committed this crime? Because it is obvious that Yanukovych had no reason to kill all these people. He gave up already, he signed agreement with the opposition, and many of people had been killed from the buildings who was formerly under control of Maidan. And also more than 20 riot policemen from the government side had been killed. So, of course, I don't have any evidence that some foreign agents or some strange structures committed this crime, but it is obvious that something very unclear in this point. And what was the result of this state coup? The far-right nationalists from Svoboda get a few ministers, and their member became prosecutor, attorney general. And the oligarchs from Yanukovych circle also get more power. And of course, this very nationalistic agenda had not been acceptable for people on the east of the country. And on the east, they made the same way as a Maidan. They organized big demonstrations in the big cities, occupying streets and squares. And what was the demands of these movements? It was very simple and understandable. This is autonomy for regions, budget autonomy, the right to spend money that they are collecting as taxes. It was recognizing of cultural and historical rights, people from the East, It was language equality, equality of Russian and Ukrainian language, and neutral status of Ukraine. But instead of that, Kiev government said that these demands are not acceptable, and they made oligarchs, the richest people in Ukraine, governors of eastern provinces. And these oligarchs immediately started to create their private armies. And instead of federalization, we received feudalization, returning to the Middle Ages when these rich people are creating private army and solving their private problems. These private armies had no transparent funding and they had no any kind of civil control. And of course they started terrorizing any kind of opposition to the government. They occupied Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine. They started terrorizing all of the forces that would disagree with this new government. Instead of establishing political dialogue with the opposition, they tried to terrorize all of the kind of mass movements like it was in Odessa. This massacre in Odessa at the main too was very well planned and organized because it was deep civil conflict, and football fans decided to make marching of Ukrainian unity devoted to the football play in Odessa. And all of the previous football plays ended with big clashes and with injured people. But the government allowed thousands of people coming to Odessa and organizing this march. And of course it was very big clashes on the streets of the city. And then these pro-governmental fans attacked a camp of opposition on one of the Odessa squares. And that's also very important to remember that some strange people in the black mask, they shooted to this demonstration and they were cooperating with the police. And then they disappeared and then police disappeared. And then this demonstration attacked a camp of opposition, and people tried to hide, to be safe in the trade union building. And then they burned this building, and more than 45 people died. They had been burned alive in this building. And then water cannons did not come when the big building was burning. Water cannons just did not come. A lot of people were jumping out of the windows and they were still alive. Our comrade, his name Andrei Brazhevsky, he jumped out from the third floor and he was still alive, but he was beaten by a far-right nationalist on the ground and he died. And his mother was also in this square and she saw everything. And she saw one young guy jump out of the window and he was still alive and he was beaten by a far-right activist. So she just lay on him and she protected him by her body, and he was alive. And she had no idea that at the same time the fascists are killing her son. Then self-proclaimed forces on the Donbass, they announced referendum about independence of Donetsk and Lugansk Republic. And of course people was quite skeptical about this because it's hard to believe that some Donetsk and Lugansk republics can exist. But then pro-government paramilitary forces committed another massacre in Mariupol in the Victories Day in May 9. At the May 11, people went to this referendum and had been voting for independence because it was a protest against this violence and against terror of governmental forces. So we had strange balance of forces. It was some self-proclaimed republics on the east of the country. They say that they don't want to obey Kiev government anymore, and it was really deep political crisis. The Ukrainian economy was collapsing dramatically, our national currency rate was falling down and the budget was empty. So International Monetary Fund say, okay, we will help you. Well, of course, demands of International Monetary Fund is very simple. You should kill your social sphere, you should have budget cuts and austerity measures, and you should establish control on the whole country. Then government announced so-called anti-terrorist operation in order to defeat all of these forces on the east. But that means that International Monetary Fund was pushing Ukrainian government to the military phase of this conflict. And you can imagine, every time in the modern world, if we are hearing about fighting with the terrorism, we are expecting and waiting massacres. It's very obvious. And the other very important point, the director of CIA visited Ukraine, visited Kiev. He tried to hide the fact of this visit, but the media reported it, and then he recognized it. He had some negotiations with Ukrainian secret service, and the next day this anti-terrorist operation starts. And who was participating in this operation from the side of Ukrainian government? That was Ukrainian National Army regular forces. Then it was National Guard, which is legal form of far-right activists and paramilitaries. It was private armies of oligarchs and different gangs who are not under anybody's control. But from the very beginning, we said that military solution of this conflict is impossible. After a few months of big fightings, Ukrainian National Army was totally defeated, and the end of the August, the front line was totally destroyed, and people were running away because that offensive operation of Ukrainian army totally collapsed. And of course, motivation of common soldiers is very low because Ukraine had proscription army that people are forced to go to the front line. And then mothers of the soldiers made a few demonstrations around the country. And the national TV, the Ukrainian national TV, showed one of the mothers. She said, everything is privatized in our country. All of the factories, plants, energy sector, even lakes are privatized and fields. It's not our country anymore. Why should we die in the name of this country? One of the governors of eastern provinces, Igor Kolomoisky, who's owner of private bank, one of the biggest banks in Ukraine, he is one of the leaders of this war party, of this military extremist wing of Ukrainian government. He was pushing this war because he get very good money on supplying of army. And then one of the Ukrainian TV channels reported how the young guy who is in Ukrainian army, he's on the front line and after the battles, and the bank is calling to his cellular phone and demanding payment for credit because he postponed the payment. So Ukrainian oligarchs say, you should be patriotic, you should fight for your country, you should show your patriotism, but don't forget to pay credits for our banks. And of course it was military catastrophe and one of the biggest humanitarian catastrophes in the world history. Because Ukrainian army, Ukrainian governmental forces concentrated 50,000 of people on the front line, and these forces are not enough to establish control on the area where 6 million of people used to live. That is why Ukrainian government and so-called separatist forces start this Minsk process, Minsk peace agreement. Inside these separatist, so-called separatist forces, there are also different currents and different understanding what is going on. The first level of division is a division to pro-Russian nationalists or like pro-Russian people, and the other side is like more for socialist development. And the other level of division is understanding of the future of these republics. Part of people would say that we are classical separatists, we should separate, we should split from Ukraine and create independent state. And the other side, it's more left-wing side, said that it is start of anti-oligarchy uprising against oligarchs in Ukraine, and we should establish some dialogue with honest people from Maidan who was against oligarchs. And of course, the leaders of this so-called separatist movement, they don't have any political experience, they don't have any political background. If you will see the leaders of military uprising, one is security guard from the supermarket, another one is middle-level manager, and one of the most popular figures there, one of the most popular persons there is Mozgovoi, who is actor of provincial theater. And he is providing this line of national-wide dialogue with people all over Ukraine. And a few weeks, 1 week ago, he established a Skype conference with the opposite side of the front line. And he said it was, from the opposite side, it was Ukrainian nationalists, very motivated, very patriotic people. And he said, why we are killing each other while oligarchs are earning money on this war? Because results of this Euromaidan movement is total disaster, total catastrophe. Because the president of Ukraine that had been elected after Maidan is Petro Poroshenko, who was founder of Yanukovych party, who was Minister of Economy in Yanukovych administration, and who is one of the oligarchs. And also, he is owner of the ship repairing factory in Sevastopol, which is in Crimea, which is now occupied by Russian forces. And his company is repairing Russian military ships, and they have very good contracts now. Also, he is owner of the sweet factories which are producing cakes and sweets and chocolate. And one of his factories are located in Russia, and it works in a very proper way. So this is hypocrisy of Ukrainian bourgeoisie, which are appealing to patriotic feelings of people, and at the same time they are making business on the military supplying, on the supplying of weapons to Ukrainian army, which is business, it's not national mobilization. Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in Europe, as I told you already, but Ukraine is one of the biggest producers of weapons in the world. I think that during the last years we was on the top 10 of exporters of weapons on the world market. And one of the Ukrainian papers, totally pro-Maidan papers, it's not Putin's agents, it's not Russian paper, pro-Ukrainian paper, made investigation how big companies making billions of hryvnias or millions of euros selling weapons to Ukrainian army. Ukrainian society was deeply shocked by this news that during the war, during the national mobilization, there are some bourgeois circles that are getting millions very easily. And everybody were waiting for some reaction from the president and from the government. And what was the reaction? It was prosecution of this journalist who made an investigation. And of course, the whole propaganda, the whole intellectual atmosphere in Ukraine is very bad. We have chauvinistic hysteria in the society, and we have ideology which is openly promoted by liberal journalists, that this conflict in Ukraine is the same conflict like conflict of Israel and Gaza, that Ukrainian state is Israel, civilized force which respect private property, and like Donbass, it's like Gaza with wild people who don't respect civilization, who are wild, and also we are in Kiev and in the west of the country, people live in the atmosphere of social racism, which is promoting that people on Donbass, the lumpens, alcoholics, and not educated, stupid people. And then Minister of Foreign Affairs Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine had a speech in Germany, and he said, now we have empty budget because we lost two regions, Lugansk and Donetsk, which have been producing 50% of Ukrainian GDP. So how it is possible that these lumpens and drunkards are producing 15% of the GDP? Yeah, and you know that not so not so long time ago, we had parliament elections in Ukraine. And the result that was reported for the Western media is that pro-European forces get big victory, and the far-right forces are out of the parliament because Svoboda and the right sector, they did not enter the parliament, on the parliament list. But the problem is that political scale in Ukraine moved to the right dramatically, and all of these paramilitary leaders, all of these far-right activists and battalion leaders, they are in the respectful bourgeois parties now. In my district where I used to live in Kiev, governmental party, Poroshenko party, supported Igor Biletsky, who was leader of fascist battalion Azov. And he was supported by liberal journalists as well. He is classical racist. I mean that he is not like far-right activist or something like this. He's classical racist, talking about supremacy of white race and fighting for future of the white race. Of course, it would be too much to say that we have fascist government in Kiev. That's not true. This is bloc of ultra-liberals, of new liberals oriented to the United States and far-right forces. Of course, President Poroshenko are not interested in the so extreme popularity of the far-right forces. He don't like it because he wants to be respectful bourgeois politic, not Adolf Hitler. Far-right forces was one of the moving forces of this uprising, of the coup against Yanukovych, and now bourgeoisie would like to say thank you and goodbye. Yeah, but they are not so stupid. Of course, they now have members of parliament, they have military organization, they have military bases, they have weapons. And of course, they are making big pressure to the government and to the president. As I told you, the President Poroshenko is one of the richest persons in Ukraine, and he is so-called chocolate king. He is producer of sweets. And but ironic situation is that he have diabetes and he is not able to eat any kind of sweets. He is producing chocolate for millions of euros and he cannot eat it. And it is the same situation in politics. He is the president of Ukraine, he is the most important person in the state, but he is not controlling the whole country. It was announced by far-right forces that if he will try to establish, to find some compromise, some peace decision of this conflict, he will be overthrown by far-right coup. And a lot of people are asking me about the role of Russia in this conflict, which is very, very important. Unfortunately, now Russia is trying to use the civil war in Ukraine in order to reach more profitable agreement with the European Union and with the United States. Some people around the world, they think that they don't realize that Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, and they think that Russia is a great anti-imperialist force. But of course, Russia is a bourgeois country which have their national interest. Karl Marx said that national interest is interest of the national bourgeoisie. And of course, this national bourgeoisie is trying to get more and more profitable place in the world bourgeois establishment. You know that Russia is one of the richest countries because they don't have so big national debt. They are selling oil and gas and they get a lot of money from that. But they are not investing this money to the national economy. They even don't share it with the people like Chavez did in Venezuela. They are buying United States obligations and shares, and they are giving credit to the United States administration. So the root of this conflict between the United States and Russia is that Russian establishment is ready to be subordinated to the United States, but they want to have right to do anything they want in Russia. But the United States say, no, it's not enough. You should establish democracy in Russia, which means that you should privatize all of the oil and gas, and we should privatize it, we should buy it. We don't have too much time to talk about this history of these relations, but we can shortly remember that after reunification of Germany, the last Soviet president Mikhail Gorbachev said, okay, we are not enemies anymore, now we should establish our common European house. Then Soviet Union collapsed and Russia had another president, democratic president, Boris Yeltsin, who was coming to Germany, drinking vodka all the time and singing Kalinka Malinka song. And he said we should establish our common security system in Europe with respectation of Russian interests. But the NATO proceeded this invasion to the east. They involved more and more countries, and they have huge cooperation program in Asia. So now Russia more and more surrounded by military bases of NATO. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, a few days ago, he said, sorry that our country is inside your military bases. And of course, Russian establishment, Russian bourgeoisie want to be integrated with the Western world. They don't want to have any kind of conflict, so they are using this Ukrainian conflict to have more preferences when they are in the negotiations. Ukrainian government now appealing to NATO forces come to Ukraine and to fight on the Ukrainian side, which of course would mean the beginning of a new world war. And Ukraine is a very unlucky country because of its geographical position. World War I, of course, mostly was in the Western Europe, but Eastern Front line also was in Ukraine, and Ukraine was occupied by German troops. Then during World War II, the front line was moving through Ukraine, and we lost 20% of our population. We don't want to be arena for the World War III. What can be the decision for our country? This is some goal which is very hard to achieve, but we should try. It should be democratic federation for Ukrainians, for Russians, and all of the minorities with the respectation of diversity of our country. It should be shutting down the role of oligarchs and denazification of the country, disarmament of all of these fascist gangs. The problem is that to achieve this very simple, very democratic, liberal program, we need socialism, because if you have so much armed people, and if you have this atmosphere of violence and mutual hate, only socialism can be the way out of this crisis. Now, unfortunately, we are very far from this goal, but we should try to do something in order to prevent big war, to prevent massive killing. Of course, the left forces in Ukraine now totally destroyed, and I know that also there is a deep crisis of the left forces in Italy. But nevertheless, we are part of historical optimism, and communists is the most massive movement in the world history. And we hope that more and more people would understand that the socialism is the only way to escape this barbarism and degradation all over the planet. So let's hope and let's fight for a better future for Ukraine, Russia, for Europe, and for all of the world. Thank you very much.